She opened that door. That's the part nobody is talking about. That's the part that has been sitting in the back of every investigator's mind since the very first morning they walked onto that porch and saw what was left behind. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, alone in her Tucson home, opened her front door at 2 in the morning. Not because she was confused. Not because someone broke through it. She unlocked it herself and stepped toward whoever was standing on the other side. And I need you to think about that for a second. Really think about it. Because an 84-year-old woman who has lived long enough to know better, who has survived 8 decades of life and all the wisdom that comes with it, does not open her front door in the pitch black of a February night for a stranger. She just doesn't. You don't. I don't. Nobody does. And yet that door opened. That single fact, that one quiet, terrifying detail, is the thread this entire investigation is now pulling on. And when you follow it all the way to the end, what you find is not what you expected. It is not what the media has been telling you. It is something far more personal, far more specific, and far more disturbing than a random kidnapping gone wrong. Stay with me, because a 25-year FBI veteran, a man who spent 13 years inside the Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit, who helped bring down the Golden State Killer, has come forward with a theory that does not just explain what happened on that porch. It explains why the FBI has gone silent. It explains why no arrest has been made. And it explains why the moment Nancy opened that door, the man standing on the other side knew his entire plan had just collapsed. By the time this video is over, you are going to understand this case in a way that most people following it simply do not. And I promise you, what is coming in the next few minutes is going to change how you see every single piece of evidence that has been released so far. Let's start at the beginning. The real beginning. February 1st, 2 in the morning. Tucson, Arizona. The desert is quiet at that hour. No traffic. No neighbors walking dogs. Just the kind of deep, heavy silence that makes every small sound feel enormous. And somewhere inside her home on that street, Nancy Guthrie was asleep. Or at least she should have been. At 1:47 in the morning, the doorbell camera on Nancy's front porch went dark. And I do not mean it glitched. I do not mean the battery died or the Wi-Fi dropped. Someone physically reached up and removed that camera from the wall. They held it in their hands. They took it down deliberately and intentionally because they did not want what was about to happen to be recorded. Think about what that tells you. Before anything else happened, before Nancy ever came to the door, someone was already on that property making calculated decisions. This was not impulsive. This was not random. Someone who came to that house already knew the camera was there. They had looked at it before. They had thought about it. And they made the decision that it needed to go. 25 minutes passed. At 2:12 in the morning, a second camera, a motion sensor that Nancy had no active subscription for, no cloud backup, nothing, just a simple device sitting there in the dark, detected movement on the property. There is no footage. There is no image. There is just a single digital signal, a quiet electronic whisper saying that at 2:12 in the morning, something was moving in Nancy Guthrie's yard. 16 minutes after that, at 2:28, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnected from the monitoring app on her phone. And Nancy Guthrie has not been seen since. That is the timeline. Every piece of it is documented. Every timestamp is verified. And I want you to lock those numbers into your mind because they are going to matter in a way you are not expecting when we get to what the FBI's behavioral expert discovered about what happened in those final minutes before that pacemaker went silent. But here is what I need to tell you right now before we go any further. 10 days into this investigation, FBI Director Kash Patel posted doorbell camera footage on social media. The physical camera had been removed. Nancy had no cloud subscription. And yet, the FBI had footage. Because Google and the FBI worked together to pull what investigators described as residual data from back-end servers, a digital ghost of what that camera recorded, sitting dormant in Nest's infrastructure, invisible and waiting. Whoever removed that camera believed they were destroying evidence. They were wrong. And the moment credentialed behavioral experts sat down and watched that footage, something shifted. Because what they saw on that porch was not what anyone expected. It was not fear. It was not urgency. It was not the frantic scrambling of a man who knew he was somewhere he did not belong. What they saw was something that stopped every single expert cold. And that is where the story really begins. Let me paint you a picture of what was on that footage. A masked man approaches Nancy Guthrie's front door in the middle of the night, armed, and he is not rushing. He is not pressing himself against the wall. He is not glancing over his shoulder every 2 seconds like a man who knows he is doing something wrong in a place he has never been. He is walking, slowly, calmly, the way you walk toward your own front door on a Saturday afternoon when you are carrying groceries and you are thinking about what's for dinner. Former FBI agent Brianna Fox, now a criminology professor at the University of South Florida and one of the most respected voices in behavioral analysis in this country, watched that footage and used one specific word. She said the suspect almost saunters up, like that is his house. Saunters. That word did not slip out by accident. That word was chosen deliberately by a trained professional who has spent years studying exactly how the human body behaves under stress, under fear, under the specific pressure of doing something dangerous in a place you do not belong. And the word she chose was not nervous. It was not cautious. It was not hesitant. It was saunter. Fox also described what she called a lack of concern that he is going to be caught. And then she said something that I have not been able to stop thinking about since the first time I heard it. She called it this kind of air of bravado, like a man who fully believed he was going to walk out of that yard the same way he walked in. Strangers do not walk like that. A stranger in a mask at 2 in the morning outside an elderly woman's home has adrenaline crashing through his system. A stranger flinches when the motion sensor light comes on. A stranger moves fast, moves sideways, moves like every second of exposure is a second too long. A stranger is terrified of being caught because a stranger has everything to lose the moment someone sees his face. This man was not terrified of anything. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, the number 2 man at the FBI, watched the same footage and independently reached the exact same conclusion. He described the approach as not particularly furtive or concerned. 2 of the most credentialed behavioral professionals in the country, watching independently, arriving at the same place. This person did not behave like a stranger. And then there is the camera cover. When he realizes the camera is still catching him, he doesn't produce spray paint. He doesn't pull out a laser pointer or a bag or anything that a person who had genuinely thought through this moment would have brought. He raises his gloved hand and tries to cover the lens directly. That fails. He looks around. He looks at the ground. He looks at the bushes. And then he grabs a handful of shrubbery from Nancy's own yard and shoves it in front of the camera. He used a plant. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Steve Moore, who has appeared across multiple network broadcasts analyzing this case, called it highly premeditated and very poorly planned. And then he said something that cuts right to the core of who this person is. He said this is the first time he has ever done something like this. Highly premeditated. First time ever. Both of those things are true at the same time. He planned enough to know the camera was a problem. He did not plan enough to solve it before he arrived. That gap, that specific distance between knowing and preparing, is the gap between someone who has thought about doing something 100 times in their head and someone who has actually done it. He had never done this before. He was operating from imagination, not from experience. And here is the part about that camera cover that I think is the most revealing detail in this entire case. He did not smash it. He covered it. Gently, clumsily, with a plant. Because smashing a camera is the act of someone who has accepted they are burning the scene. They are done. They are not coming back. Covering a camera, even with a handful of bushes, is the act of someone who still believes they are going to walk away clean. Someone who, in that moment, still thought the plan was working. Someone who had not yet understood what was about to go wrong. And now I need to tell you about the gun. Because the gun tells you something about this man that changes the shape of this entire night. The suspect in that footage is carrying what investigators identified as what appears to be a compact semi-automatic pistol. CNN firearms analyst Stephen Gowski described it as resembling a Sig Sauer P365, one of the most common and accessible concealed carry weapons in the country. Sold at Walmart, sold at gun stores, easy to get, easy to carry. But the holster, that is where everything falls apart. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe was unambiguous. He said no person with law enforcement or military training, none, would ever carry a firearm in a holster positioned the way this suspect positioned it. Hanging off the front of the belt directly at the center of the body, not positioned for a dominant hand draw, not positioned for defensive use, not positioned in any way that reflects a single hour of legitimate firearms training. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Steve Moore went further. He pointed out that the holster and the gun do not even match each other. A small subcompact pistol designed for concealed carry, the kind you could slip into a jacket pocket without a second thought, stuffed into a large holster designed for a heavier, bigger frame revolver. They are incompatible. That is not a setup chosen by someone who knows what they are doing with a weapon. That is a setup chosen by someone who owns a gun and a holster and grabbed both without thinking about whether they went together. And then there are the gloves. Johnny Guthrie, 25-year FBI Special Agent, 13 years coordinating behavioral analysis in the Denver Division, pointed out something that the moment you hear it you cannot unhear. The thick gloves the suspect was wearing to avoid leaving DNA, those same gloves made it nearly impossible to operate the weapon. You cannot slide a gloved finger into a trigger guard designed for a bare hand. You cannot get a proper firing grip on a compact pistol when your hands are wrapped in heavy material. The gloves that were meant to protect him from identification also rendered his weapon functionally useless. Grusing's conclusion was direct. The gun was likely a prop, not a weapon of violence, a weapon of theater. Something to project threat, something to make an 84-year-old woman believe the situation was more dangerous than it actually was, something to create compliance without requiring the suspect to ever pull a trigger. You do not need to be able to fire a gun to make someone believe you will. You just need to show it. And if that gun was never going to be fired, then we have to ask the real question. The question that changes this entire case. Because if the gun was not the tool, what was? What did this man actually use to get Nancy Guthrie to unlock that door at 2 in the morning? Johnny Guthrie looked at every piece of behavioral evidence on that porch. The saunter, the improvised camera cover, the prop weapon, the calm approach, and he arrived at an answer that is not about tactics or weapons or criminal technique at all. He believes the tool was familiarity. He believes Nancy Guthrie opened that door because some part of her, before she was fully awake, before her threat assessment could fire properly, recognized the person standing on the other side of it. And that is where this investigation becomes something entirely different from what most people think it is. Johnny Guthrie did not arrive at this theory casually. This is not a retired agent talking on television to fill airtime. This is the man who coordinated behavioral analysis for the FBI's Denver Division for 13 years. This is the man who worked violent crimes, kidnappings, sexual assaults, homicides, cold cases that had gathered dust for decades while families sat and waited. This is the man who helped bring down the Golden State Killer using investigative genetic genealogy, the same technology now pointed directly at whoever left DNA on Nancy Guthrie's porch. When Johnny Guthrie looks at a kidnapping case, he is not guessing. He is reading behavior the way other people read words on a page. And here is what he read on that porch. Guthrie asked a question that I want you to sit with before I give you his answer. He said, "Is there a chance that since we do not have audio, this man is either knocking loudly or pressing the Ring doorbell, trying to get Nancy to come to the door, and shielding himself from the camera not because he is afraid of being caught on video, but so that she will not immediately see a masked figure and panic? So she will, in her confusion, see the edge of a face, a silhouette, someone whose presence she can process for 1 single second before fear sets in? That is not a rhetorical question. That is a behavioral framework with a specific mechanical answer. The plan required Nancy to cooperate. Not willingly, not knowingly, but enough. It required her to unlock that door. And if she recognized something, a shape, a voice, a way of moving, something her brain processed before she was fully conscious of processing it, she might have done exactly that. Human beings recognize the people they know in ways that are not fully explainable. Research on recognition tells us consistently that we identify familiar individuals as much by the way they move, the particular posture of their shoulders, the specific rhythm of how they breathe, as by the features of their face. A person you have known for years registers somewhere deep in your nervous system before your conscious brain has formed a single thought about it. It is not a decision. It is biology doing what it was designed to do. Guthrie believes that biology is what opened that door. And then he believes something else happened. Something the man on that porch did not plan for and was not prepared to handle. Because in the moment that door swung open and whatever light existed on that porch caught the shape of the man standing there, Nancy Guthrie's brain finished what it started. She recognized him. Not just a vague sense of familiarity. Full recognition. The kind that hits you in the chest before the word for it arrives in your mind. Maybe the mask shifted slightly. Maybe the angle of the overhead light fell across a feature he had not accounted for. Maybe it had nothing to do with his face at all. Maybe it was his voice, the first word he said, or the specific way he held his arm, or the shape of his build in the dark that her nervous system had filed away years ago without telling her. However it happened, Guthrie believes it happened. And in the same instant that Nancy recognized him, the man on that porch understood what her recognition meant. His anonymity was gone. The one thing the entire operation depended on, the one thing that made everything else possible, had disappeared in a single second. And the blood on that porch? Nancy's blood, confirmed by DNA, found on her front porch and down the driveway? That is what happened next. That is the panicked escalation that follows the moment a perpetrator realizes his identity has been compromised. Not what was supposed to happen. Not what he planned. Not what a prop gun and a handful of shrubbery and a carefully timed approach in the dark of night were designed to produce. This was desperation. This was a plan falling apart in real time. Now, the ransom notes. Communications claiming to be ransom demands were sent to media outlets. TMZ received what was described as a sophisticated demand involving cryptocurrency. Other outlets received similar messages. But here is the single detail that stopped investigators from the very first morning and has never stopped stopping them. Not one note was sent to the Guthrie family. Not one. Not to Savannah. Not to Nancy's daughter, who is one of the most recognizable journalists in America, who has a platform and an audience of millions, who would have moved heaven and earth to respond to a credible ransom demand. If you kidnap an 84-year-old woman for money and her daughter is Savannah Guthrie, you contact Savannah Guthrie. You send proof of life. You establish a channel. You name your price. That is how every kidnapping for ransom in the history of American law enforcement works. This one did not work that way. Guthrie's conclusion was that those ransom notes do not behave like genuine demands. They behave like noise. Like something designed to point investigators in the wrong direction, to plant a financial motive in the middle of an investigation that is actually about something far more personal. And Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos sat down with reporters and said something that I have been sitting with ever since. He said, the motivation is where we get stuck. Is it for money? Or is it for revenge for something? Revenge for something. A sitting sheriff, in a public interview, using the word revenge. That word was not an accident. And then in March, Nanos said something even more specific. He said, we believe we know why he did this, and we believe it was targeted. Targeted. They know the motive. They believe they know the man. And they believe this was not random. Not opportunistic. Not the work of a stranger passing through Tucson who chose an 84-year-old woman at random. This was aimed at Nancy specifically, for a reason that is personal and specific and exists somewhere in the history between Nancy Guthrie and someone whose face she recognized on a February night at 2 in the morning. Now let me tell you what the FBI has been doing while all of this behavioral work has been unfolding. Because the physical investigation is building toward the same point the behavioral analysis already reached. And the convergence of those two threads is what makes this case feel, right now, like it is one piece of evidence away from something none of us are ready for. In mid-February, roughly 2.5 weeks into the investigation, a Tucson gun store owner named Philip Martin came forward. Martin is the co-owner of Armor Bearer Arms, and what he described confirmed something significant about exactly how targeted this investigation has become. An FBI agent walked into his store carrying 3 pages of names and photographs. Approximately 18 to 24 individuals. The agent asked Martin to cross-reference every name against his store's purchase records. Had any of these people bought a firearm in the past year? 3 pages. Named individuals. photographs next to each name. This is not how you investigate a ghost. This is not how you proceed when you have no theory and no leads. You do not walk into gun stores across Tucson with specific faces on specific pages asking specific questions unless you already have a specific picture of who you are looking for. The FBI has faces. They have names. They have a suspect pool. And they got those names, at least in part, from Walmart. Because the backpack the suspect was wearing, black 25 liters Ozark Trail, was identified as sold exclusively through Walmart. Sheriff Nanos confirmed it was the only item of clothing or equipment on that suspect that could be definitively traced to a single retailer. Walmart keeps records, transaction data, surveillance footage inside every store. If that backpack was purchased with a card, there is a name attached. If it was purchased with cash, there is potentially still footage. And investigators worked directly with Walmart management to develop those leads. The backpack leads to Walmart. Walmart leads to purchase records. Records lead to names. Names lead to photographs. Photographs go into gun stores across Tucson. Each step closing the circle a little tighter around whoever was on that porch. And then there is the DNA. Foreign DNA was recovered from Nancy Guthrie's property. Her family was tested and cleared. What remains is biological material that does not belong to anyone with a documented reason to have been there. And Sheriff Nanos confirmed the DNA is mixed, meaning it contains material from more than one person, which creates complications for a direct database match. But Cece Moore, the woman who pioneered investigative genetic genealogy in the United States and has contributed to more than 1,000 criminal case identifications, went on record with NBC News and said something that left no room for interpretation. She said, "If I were the kidnapper, I would be extremely concerned right now. Because using investigative genetic genealogy, he will be identified. Not might be, will be. The same technology that Johnny Grusing used to corner the Golden State Killer is now pointed directly at whoever stood on Nancy Guthrie's porch." Joseph James D'Angelo evaded law enforcement for decades. He thought he was safe. He was not. His relative's DNA built a family tree that walked investigators directly to his door. And here is what you need to understand about that technology. It does not care how careful you were. It does not care how many precautions you took or how long ago you did what you did. If your relatives have ever submitted DNA to any genealogy service, anywhere, you are findable. You have always been findable. You just did not know it. The suspect pool from Walmart, the photographs in gun stores, the DNA in a Florida lab, the behavioral framework from Grusing pointing toward someone from Nancy's own world. Every thread in this investigation is moving toward the same point. The FBI has not announced an arrest. And right now, in this moment, I want to tell you exactly what that silence means. Because most people watching a case like this interpret the quiet as a sign that nothing is happening. That investigators are stuck. That the trail has gone cold. That is not what is happening here. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Lance Lysing told CBS Evening News something I think every person following this case needs to hear. He said he hopes the silence is because investigators are on to something, that they just need to investigate further. And former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, who has been one of the sharpest and most consistent analytical voices throughout this entire case, put it in terms that I have not been able to walk away from since I first heard them. She said, "Those investigators know so much more than we do, and they are on to something. They are on to something big. They just may be having a hard time proving it. Hard time proving it. Not finding it. Not identifying it. Proving it. That distinction is everything. It is the specific distance between knowing who did something and being able to stand in front of a jury and demonstrate it beyond reasonable doubt. The FBI is not lost. They are building. There is a difference between an investigation that has gone quiet because it has run out of road and an investigation that has gone quiet because the investigators have walked far enough down the road that they can now see where it ends, and they are taking careful, deliberate steps toward that ending without doing anything to alert the person waiting there that they are coming. Sheriff Chris Nanos told NBC News in March, "From day one we had strong beliefs about what happened, and those beliefs have not diminished. Not hunches, beliefs. Tested over weeks of documented evidence, cross-referenced investigation, behavioral analysis, DNA work, commercial record tracing, and the kind of methodical institutional patience that produces convictions rather than headlines. Beliefs that have been challenged every single day by new evidence and have not budged. He said they believe they know why. He said they believe it was targeted. He used the word revenge in a public interview. These are not the words of a man speaking loosely. These are the words of a law enforcement official telegraphing the shape of what his investigation has built, carefully enough to protect the process, clearly enough that people paying attention understand what he is saying. Now let me bring everything together. Because this is the synthesis that Johnny Guthrie built and that I believe represents the most complete picture of this case that any credentialed professional has offered publicly. A man approached Nancy Guthrie's home in the early morning hours of February 1st with a plan. Not a professional plan. Not the plan of a career criminal who had done this before and knew every variable to account for. A plan built in someone's mind over weeks or months, rehearsed in imagination, never tested in reality. A plan that counted on darkness, on surprise, on an elderly woman too disoriented at 2 in the morning to think clearly before cooperating. A plan that required her to open that door. He removed the camera. He improvised with shrubbery when the improvised cover failed. He carried a weapon he may never have intended to use, positioned incorrectly, in a holster that did not fit, rendered functionally compromised by the very gloves he wore to avoid leaving traces of himself. He sauntered up to that door with the quiet confidence of someone who believed, truly believed, that he was going to walk away from this clean and in control. And then Nancy opened the door. And in that moment, in whatever light fell across that porch at 2:28 in the morning, something passed between them that no mask and no darkness and no carefully constructed plan had accounted for. Recognition. The specific, irreversible, biological fact of two people who know each other coming face to face. She knew him, and the instant he understood that she knew him, everything that plan was built on collapsed. The control was gone. The anonymity was gone. The quiet and clean operation he had rehearsed in his mind dissolved in real time, and what replaced it was panic. Pure panicked escalation from a man who had prepared for everything except the one thing that actually happened. The blood on that porch is what panic looks like. The pacemaker that went silent at 2:28 is what that panic cost. And Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, a woman who needed daily medication, who had lived long enough to recognize the face of someone she knew standing masked on her front porch in the dark, has not been seen since. The Guthrie family has not given up for a single day. Savannah Guthrie, her daughter, has stepped away from the Today Show, the anchor chair she has held for years, because she is fighting for her mother. The community around Nancy's home in Tucson has left flowers and candles and handwritten notes from strangers who never met her but cannot stop thinking about her. The FBI task force Sheriff Nanos described is still fully active. The DNA is still in a Florida lab. The photographs are still moving through gun stores. The genealogy investigators are still building family trees from biological material left behind by someone who believed they were invisible. They are not invisible. They have never been invisible. They just have not been found yet. But the behavioral framework says they are known. The investigative record says they are being closed in on. And Johnny Guthrie, the man who knows better than almost anyone alive what it looks like when an investigation is truly coming to a close, has looked at every piece of this case and said what he said. Whatever happened in that doorway, Nancy recognized the man standing there. And if you are sitting wherever you are right now and you know something about this, anything, a behavioral change you noticed in someone after February 1st, a conversation that did not sit right, something you saw that you have been telling yourself probably does not matter, it matters. Call 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Bureau is offering up to $100,000 for information leading to Nancy's recovery or to the arrest of anyone involved. The Guthrie family is offering up to $1 million for information that brings Nancy home. Someone out there is carrying something they have not put down yet. If that is you, this is the moment to put it down. We will be here covering this case every step of the way, every verified development, every credentialed analysis, every documented piece of evidence as it surfaces. Every source in this video is named. Every expert is credentialed. Every quote has been verified. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. And somewhere in Tucson, the answers already exist. If you made it this far, you already know this case is different. Subscribe and hit the bell so you do not miss the moment this investigation breaks wide open. Because based on everything we have walked through today, that moment is coming. And when it does, you are going to want to have been following this from the beginning.